to enter. American critics ignored her compelling voice. She was repeatedly rejected for parts for which she was easily qualified. It was only after she went to Europe and won over hard to please European audiences that American stateside opinion leaders acknowledged her talent. Not only was her professional life a battle, her personal life was marked by challenge as well. She was the mother of two handicapped children. Her oldest, a daughter, was born deaf. Her youngest, a son, was severely mentally handicapped. Trying to escape the hustle and bustle of New York City, she moved and bought a house to Martha's Vineyard. But 2 days before she moved in, the house burned to the ground. Professional rejection, personal setbacks, the perfect soil for seeds of resentment, a receptive field for the roots of bitterness. But in this case, anger found no home. Her friends do not call her bitter, they call her Bubbles. Beverly Seals, internationally acclaimed opera star. Her phrases are, well, they're sugared with laughter. Her face is softened with serenity. Upon interviewing her, Mike Wallace stated that she was the most impressive woman he had ever interviewed. How can a person handle such rejection in the professional life, such personal trauma, and still be known as Bubbles? I choose to be cheerful, she said. Years ago, I realized I had no control over my professional success, no control over my circumstances, no control even over my happiness, but I could choose to be cheerful. We have prayed for healing. God has not given it, but he has blessed us. Glenn spoke slowly, partly because she was speaking from conviction, partly because of her disease. Her husband, Don, sat in a chair next to her. The three of us had come together to plan a funeral, hers. And now with the task done, the scriptures chosen, the hymn selected, the instructions given, Glenn spoke. He has given us strength we did not know we had. He gave it when we needed it, never before. Her words were slurred but clear. Her eyes were moist but confident. I wondered what it would be like to have my life ended at age 45. I wondered what it would be like to have to say goodbye to my spouse and my children. I wondered what it would be like to witness my own death. God has given us peace in our pain, she says. He covers us all the time. Even when we are out of control, he is still there. It had been a year since Glenn and Don had learned of Glenn's diagnosis, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease. The cause and the cure remain a mystery. The results aren't. Muscle strength and ability steadily deteriorate, leaving only the mind and the faith. And it was this coming together of Glenn's mind and faith that caused me to realize I was doing more than preparing a funeral. I was beholding holy jewels quarried from the mine of despair. We can use tragedy as a stumbling block or as a stepping stone, Glenn said. I hope this experience will not cause my family to be bitter. I hope that I can model how to trust God in both the good times and the bad, because you see, if you don't trust God in the bad times, you never really trust him at all. Don held her hand. He wiped the tears from his cheeks. Who are these two? I asked myself as I watched him touch a tissue to Glenn's cheek. Who are these two who, on the edge of River's life, can look across with such faith? The moment was solemn and sweet. I said little. One is not bold in the presence of the sacred, was more joyful. His first home was the palace. Servants were at his fingertips. At a snap of his finger, he changed human history. His name was known and loved. He had everything: wealth, power, and respect. And then he had nothing. Students still ponder the event. Historians stumble over trying to explain it. How can a king lose everything in a moment? One moment he was royalty, the next he was poverty personified. His bed became, at best, a pallet on the floor. Most of the time, it was the cold, hard earth. He never owned any form of basic transportation. He was dependent upon handouts for his income. He was sometimes hungry, so hungry he would eat raw grain or fruit he had picked from a tree. He knew what it was like to be rained on. He knew what it was like to be cold. He knew what it was like to be homeless. His palace grounds had been spotless. Now he is surrounded by filth. He had never known sickness, but now he's surrounded by illness. In his kingdom, he had been revered. Now he is ridiculed. His neighbors tried to lynch him. Some called him a lunatic. His family even tried to lock him up in the house. Those who didn't ridicule him tried to use him. They wanted favors. They wanted magic tricks. He was a novelty. He was a person to be seen with, that is, until he went out of fashion. Then they wanted to kill him. He was accused of a crime he never committed. Witnesses were hired to testify against him. The jury was rigged. No lawyer was assigned for his defense. A judge, swayed by politics, passed the death penalty. They killed him. He left as he came, penniless. He was buried in a borrowed grave, funeral financed by friends. Though he once had everything, he died with nothing. He should have been miserable. He should have been bitter. He had every right to be a boiling pot of anger, but he wasn't. He was joyful. Sourpusses don't attract a following, but crowds followed him wherever he went. Children avoid sore heads, but children scampered to be with him. People don't listen to the woeful, but crowds hum on his every word. Why? He was joyful. He was joyful when he was poor. He was joyful when he was abandoned. He was joyful when he was betrayed. He was joyful when they hung him on an instrument of torture and drove 6-inch spikes through his hands. Jesus embodied a stubborn joy, a joy that refused to bend with the winds of hard times, a joy that held its ground against pain, a joy whose roots extended into the bedrock of eternity. Perhaps that's where Beverly Seals learned it. Without a doubt, that's where Glenn Johnson and Robert Reed learned it. And it's where you and I can learn it too. What type of joy is this? What is the cheerfulness that dares to wink at adversity? What is the bird that sings when it is still dark? What is the source of peace that defies pain? I call it sacred delight. It is sacred because it is not of this earth. What is sacred belongs to God, and this joy is God's. It is delight because delight can both satisfy and surprise. Delight is Bethlehem's shepherd dancing outside of a cave. Delight is Mary watching the Son of God sleep in an animal trough. Delight is a white-haired Simeon praising God before he is circumcised. Delight is Joseph teaching the creator of the universe how to hold a hammer. Delight is the look on Andrew's face as he shares a lunch pail that will never go empty. Delight is the dozing wedding guest who awake to drink wine, which has just recently been water. Delight is Jesus walking on waves as easily as you and I push aside curtains. Delight is a leper seeing a finger where once a nub had been. Delight is a widow hosting a dinner party with food brought for a funeral. Delight is Jesus doing impossible things in crazy ways, healing the blind with spit, paying taxes with a coin bought from the mouth of a fish. Delight is Jesus coming back from the dead, disguised as a gardener. What a sacred delight. It is God doing what God would do only in our wildest dreams. Wearing diapers, riding donkeys, washing feet, sleeping through storms. Delight is the day they accused God of having too much fun. He's attended too many parties and spent too much time with the happy hour crowd. Delight is paying a day's wages to a worker who's worked for only an hour. Delight is a father scrubbing the pig stink off of his son's back. It is shepherd throwing a party over a lost sheep. It's discovering a pearl without price. It is a heaven-bound beggar, a criminal walking the streets of gold in the kingdom. Delight is the surprise on the faces of street folks who suddenly find themselves invited to a king's banquet. Delight is the Samaritan woman, big-eyed and speechless, an adulteress walking away from a cobble-strewn courtyard. It's a skinny-clad Peter diving into the Sea of Galilee to be close to a man he had cursed. Sacred delight is good news coming through the back door of your heart. It's what you always dreamed of but never expected. It is the too good to be true coming true. It's having God as your pinch hitter, your lawyer, your dad, your biggest fan, your best friend, God on your side, God in your heart, God out front, walking point, God behind you, checking your six. It's hope where you least expected it. It's a flower on the sidewalk of life. It is sacred because only God can grant it. It is a delight because it thrills. And since it is sacred, it can't be stolen. Since it is delightful, it can't be predicted. It was this gladness that had the children of Israel dance through the Red Sea. It was this gladness that made Mary sing. It was this joy that blew the trumpet outside of Jericho. It was the surprise that put the spring in Easter morning. It is sacred delight. And it's the sacred delight that Jesus promises to us in the Sermon on the Mount. 9 times he promises it. And he promises it to an unlikely crowd. The poor in spirit, beggars in God's soup kitchen, those who mourn, sinners anonymous who stand up and say, hey, this is me, John Huskins. I am a sinner. The meek, pawn shop pianos being played by a Van Cliburn who plays so skillfully that nobody misses or notices the missing keys. Those who hunger and thirst, famished orphans who know the difference between a TV dinner and a Thanksgiving feast. The merciful, winners of a multi-million-dollar lottery who decide to share the proceeds with their enemies. The pure in heart, doctors and nurses who treat COVID-19 and still remain uninfected. The peacemakers, architects who build bridges out of Roman crosses. The persecuted, those who manage to keep an eye on heaven while walking through hell on earth. It is this band of pilgrims that God promises a special blessing, a heavenly joy, a sacred delight. But this joy is not cheap. What Jesus promises is not a gimmick that gives us goosebumps. It's not an attitude of mind that we have to pump up with pep rallies. No, Matthew 5 describes God's radical reconstruction of the heart. Observe the sequence. First, we recognize that we're poor in spirit, that we have needs. Then we repent of our self-sufficiency. We mourn. We quit calling the shots and we surrender to God. We become meek. We are so grateful for his presence and we want it so badly that we hunger and thirst. As we draw closer to him, we become like him. We forgive others. We are merciful. We change our outlook. We are pure in heart. We love others. We become peacemakers. We endure injustice. We become persecuted. It's no casual shift of attitude. It's the demolition of an old structure and the creation of a new. The more radical the change, the greater the joy. And it's worth every effort because it is the joy of God. It's no accident that the word God used to promise us this sacred delight was also used by Paul to describe God. He calls him the blessed God. God, the blessed and only ruler. Think about God's joy. What can cloud it? What can quench it? What can kill it? Is God ever in a bad mood because of bad weather? Does he ever get ruffled over long lines and traffic jams? Does God ever refuse to rotate the earth just because his feelings are hurt? No. His is a joy that consequences cannot quench. His is a peace which circumstances cannot steal. There is a delicious gladness that comes from God, a holy joy, a sacred delight, and it's within your reach. You are one decision away from joy.